Little Johnny had just graduated college and his parents sent him to Aruba for a graduation gift. Well, one morning he was walking on the beach and there was a lady laying there with no arms and no legs, just crying. Johnny says, "What's wrong?" And she says, "I've never been hugged before." So Johnny picks her up and gives her a hug and sets her back down. Well, she continues to cry and he says, "Well, what's wrong?" She goes, "Well, I've never been kissed either." So Johnny, being the nice kid that he is, he picks her up and gives her a kiss. Sets her back down and she's crying even harder than before. He says, "Well, what's wrong?" She says, "Well, I've never been screwed before either." Johnny says, "I've had enough of this." He picks her up, throws her in the ocean. He says, "There you are. Now you're screwed." There was 3 boys sitting right out in front of Johnny's house waiting for him to get home from school. And out in front of that house, there was a Maserati, a Lamborghini, and a Ferrari. First little boy says, "When I get older," he says, "I'm going to be a businessman." He says, "So I can own that Maserati out front." Second kid said, he says, "When I get older," he says, "I'm going to be a doctor." He says, "So I can own that Lamborghini." Third kid says, "When I get older, I'm going to be in real estate so I can buy that Ferrari when I get older." And little Johnny comes home and says, "What are you guys talking about?" And they told him about the cars, and little Johnny says, "You guys got it all wrong." He says, "When I get older," he says, "I want to have hair all over my body." "Why would you want to do that?" He says, "Because my sister only has a patch this big and she owns all 3 of those cars." Little Johnny and little Susie got married and they moved into their new house. After about a week of being there was a leaky pipe and little Susie asked Johnny if he could fix it. He says, "What do I look like, Mr. Plumber?" And she just shook her head. A week later goes by and her car won't start. She goes, "Little Johnny, you think you could check out my car?" He says, "What do I look like, Mr. Goodwrench?" She shakes her head and goes about her day. And about a week later, there's a leaky roof. And she goes, "Johnny, could you check out that leak?" He says, "What do I look like, Bob Vila?" She shakes her head again. A couple days go by, little Johnny comes home and everything's fixed. He goes, "What'd you do?" She said, "I hired a handyman." He goes, "Oh, great. What's that going to cost me?" She said, "Nothing." He says, "Well, what'd you pay him?" He says, "Well, he said I could either have sex with him or bake him a cake." Little Johnny says, "Well, what kind of cake did you bake him?" She goes, "What do I look like, Betty Crocker?" Little Johnny and his wife were married for 50 years. His wife says to him, "Hey, little Johnny, how about we get naked and eat supper together like we did on our very first night living in this home?" Little Johnny says, "Okay," and they strip down to no clothes and starting eating their supper. His wife looks over at him and says, "You know, little Johnny, my nipples are just as hot for you right now as they were the day I met you." Johnny smiles and says, "Yeah, that's because they're in your soup." Little Johnny gets on the bus and sits directly behind the bus driver because he's always getting in trouble. He says, "Hey, bus driver, what's soft and wet when you go to bed, but hard and stiff when you wake up?" Bus driver gets all mad. He says, "Little Johnny, you better not say something bad or you're going to be in trouble." He says, "Oh, it's not what you think. It's puke." Little Johnny's school goes on a field trip to the fire department. Firefighter holds up a smoke detector and says, "You know what this is?" Little Johnny raises his hand. He says, "Yeah, I know exactly what that is." He says, "That's what my mom uses to know when the food's ready." Little Johnny's bartending and the guy comes in and says, "Oh, hey, I want a rum and coke." Little Johnny says, "Hey, I got something that's better than that." And he throws him an apple. He says, "This is no rum and coke." He says, "Take a bite of it." Takes a bite and he says, "Oh, it just tastes like Coke." He says, "Turn it around." Turns it around and it tastes like rum. So he has a perfect rum and Coke. Another guy comes in, he says, "I want a whiskey and 7. So the guy says, "I got something better." He throws him the apple. Takes a bite. He says, "Oh, it tastes just like whiskey." He says, "Well, turn it around." Turns it around, 7 Up. So he's like, "Oh, yeah, perfect combination." Another guy comes in and he's, "So what are you guys talking about?" He says, "He's got these apples and they taste exactly like what we want." He says, "Oh, yeah? I want an apple then that tastes like pussy." So Johnny throws him an apple. The guy takes a bite. He says, "Oh, it tastes like shit." They all said, "Turn it around." Johnny's teacher was trying to broaden the kids' horizon through sensory perception by bringing them in a bunch of different lifesavers that had a lot of different flavors. The kids could easily recognize cherry, mint, and lemon flavors, but they were pretty much stumped by the honey flavor. The teacher said, "Well, I'll give you a hint. It's something that your mother might call your father." Little Johnny screams, "Spit it out, spit it out. The flavor is asshole." You don't want to eat assholes.
Little Johnny joins a nudist colony and his mom doesn't believe him. She says, little Johnny, send me a picture of yourself. So he sends one of the top half and he says, okay. About a week later, his grandma says, I haven't had a picture of you in a while. Send me one. So accidentally, little Johnny sends her a picture of his bottom half. Well, he knows that his grandma has bad eyesight, so he really doesn't think anything of it. But then his grandma proceeds to write him a letter. He gets a letter about a week later, and his grandma says, you know, I really don't like your new haircut. It makes your nose look too big. Little Johnny and his dad were driving behind a dump truck when a big old dildo comes up and smacks the windshield. To spare little Johnny's innocence, his dad says, hey, son, don't worry. That was just an insect that hit the window. Little Johnny says, oh, really? With a dick that big, I'm surprised he was able to fly anywhere. Little Johnny and his dad were Amish, and they went to the mall for the first time. They were super excited by everything that they saw, but they were super mesmerized by the elevator. They saw the doors opening and closing and people going in and out. And little Johnny says, Dad, what is that? Little Johnny's dad said, I'm not sure what that is. Well, just as he said that, there was a bigger lady that rolled up in a wheelchair, pushed a button, and went inside. Well, the elevator went all the way up to number 24 and then came back down, and this beautiful blonde came walking out. Little Johnny's dad looked at him and says, hey, go get your mother. Little Johnny's all grown up and he gets himself a pet alligator. He brings it into the bar, and the bartender says, hey, you can't have that alligator in here. And little Johnny says, oh, don't worry about it, he's tame. He says, watch this. He says the alligator open his mouth as wide as it can go, and little Johnny sticks his balls inside of it. The alligator doesn't close his mouth for 10 minutes. Bartender says, wow, that's amazing. Little Johnny says, does anybody else want to try? Guy across the bar says, oh, I'd love to, but I don't think I can keep my mouth open as long. There's these three guys that are stuck on an Empire State Building, and they find a genie lamp. They rub on the lamp, and the genie comes out and he says, oh my gosh, guys, you are in luck. He says, I'm going to grant you each one wish to get off the top of this Empire State Building. All you need to do is, when you go to run and jump, just say that you are an eagle or a falcon or any type of bird so that you can fly down to safety. So the first guy goes and runs. He jumps off and he says, American Eagle, and he flies down to safety. Second guy goes and runs and he says, Falcon, and he flies down to safety. The third guy runs, he trips on a rock and he says, shit, plop. Oh. Johnny's teacher asked him, hey, little Johnny, if you had $2 and you asked your dad for $2, how much money would you have? Well, Johnny thinks and he says, I'd have $2. She says, well, you can't add very well, can you, little Johnny? He says, maybe not, but you don't know my dad, do you? Little Susie comes home from school one day and said that the boys were asking her to do cartwheels during recess. And her mom says, don't do that, little Susie. They only want to see your panties. And she says, I know. And that's why I put them in my bag. Little Johnny's sitting in the doctor's office when the doctor comes in and he says, little Johnny, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Little Johnny says, all right, doc, let me have it. He says, well, you're going to have to stop masturbating. Little Johnny says, why? The doctor says, well, because I'm trying to examine you. There's an Italian guy, a guy from Mexico, and little Johnny sitting on a park bench, and they're all talking. The guy from Italy says, when I get done and making love to my wife, I tickle behind her knees, and she floats off the bed in 6 inches in ecstasy. The guy from Mexico says, oh, senor, that is nothing. When I'm done making love to my wife, I kiss all down her body, and then I kiss the bottom of her soles on her feet, and she floats off the bed 12 inches in ecstasy. Little Johnny says, hey, guys, that's nothing. He says, when I get done with my old lady, I walk over to the window, wipe my pecker on the curtains, and she hits the fucking ceiling. Little Johnny and his wife are driving down the road, and a skunk runs out, and Johnny just nails it. His wife gets out and says, oh, it's still alive, and I think if we get it to the vet, we can save its life. Little Johnny says, well, bring it on in the car, and we'll go. And she goes, well, it's just so cold. And he says, well, put it between your legs and keep it warm, and once we get him to the doctor, he should be fine. She says, oh, but it stinks. Well, Johnny looks over at her. Yeah, I know it stinks. That's why you're going to have to plug its nose, because I'm still not used to that smell. Little Johnny comes home from the pool all mad. His dad says, "What's wrong?" He said, "Well, you told me if I put a potato in my shorts, it would impress the girls." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, you didn't tell me to put it in the front. The lifeguard kicked me out of the pool. He thought I crapped my pants."